I really hope next week is a change of pace because these episodes are becoming progressively more boring for me. Well, I certainly got what I asked for. We open up with Miriel doing a baby name blessing when suddenly the ground shakes a bit. Miriel dismisses it, but then the shaking becomes more violent, and so she goes outside and sees that Numenor is sinking. At this point it becomes clear that this is a nightmare as the water begins to consume Miriel and spill into the main palace. So I'm going to keep this brief because we've got a lot to talk about this episode, but why does Miriel have this face when she's watching all of this? We know she's not completely unflappable as she screams not 2 seconds later when the water rushes in, so this isn't some Man of Steel death scene, but also, I'm gonna be honest, I just didn't find this to be very compelling as a nightmare. Usually, a nightmare sequence isn't simply there to display information, it's to give voice to the internal psychology of the character. The dream is meant to make us feel what the character is feeling, but this seems to only accomplish telling us that Miriel knows about the Akalabeth and that she's scared of it. Two things that we learn much more effectively later this episode. In fact, I feel like the whole Great Wave visual would have been much more effective if we had seen it first with Galadriel. More importantly though, I think this brief analysis is actually longer than the entire dream sequence, which really isn't enough to build up the tension of what's going on. This is yet another scene where I feel like they rushed through it, and it would have been far better had they given it some time to breathe. This show is such a bizarre mix of being incredibly slow-paced while also rushing through most of its scenes. I'm not sure how they managed to pull that off, but here we are. Speaking of which, next we have a scene where this guy, whom I'm going to call Donald for obvious reasons, starts complaining about the fact that Galadriel is talking to the queen after her companion punched him in the eye and broke this dude's arm last episode. This is juxtaposed to Pharazôn going about his daily business when his son, whose existence I already have a problem with, but we'll wait until he screws something up to talk about that, informs him about Donald's speech. We then get this.
Oh, elf workers! Taking your trades! Workers who don't sleep, don't tire, don't age. I say, the queen's either blind or an elf lover, just like her father. Elf lover! Elf lover! Elf lover! Elf lover!
Then Pharazôn comes in, calls them all a bunch of mewling children, talks about how great Numenor is, and suddenly he's got the entire crowd on his side. Bit of a bipolar crowd, but I guess that's normal. What's certainly less normal is that he ends the speech by saying, "Drinks all round," and then immediately serving ladies come out with wine for the entire crowd. Oh, what's going on? So first off, I wanted to point out that in medieval societies, which Lord of the Rings is partially based on, the whole rousing speech to a crowd wasn't really a thing. Common folk didn't particularly trust demagogues, they usually trusted people who acted kingly or nobly, which included, among other things, ignoring the rabble. This could work if Numenor were a democracy of some sort along the lines of Athens, but it's very clearly a monarchy with plenty of noble houses. And look, I'm not saying that this is a better system or trying to imply anything, I'm just simply saying that that's what it was like, and you can either accept that and work with it, or just ignore it and make your show look more stupid. More importantly though, why and how did Pharazôn suddenly get tons of drinks for everyone? I get that this is supposed to show him as being a people's man, or something like that. But couldn't they have done it in a less goofy way than him waving his hands and suddenly causing drinks to appear? Also, these two non-existent characters, one whose name I can't pronounce and the other whose name sounds like Kevin, which is just perfect, are going to have a romantic subplot. Great. Our next scene is with Miriel and Galadriel, where she presents the evidence that Sauron is going to take over the Southlands, and that Halbrand is a king who can unite the Southlands. Miriel responds to this, no joke, by saying that Galadriel vexes her because she welcomed her as a guest, and yet she gallops off to the countryside and steals scrolls. I'm sorry. What? I suppose the notion that she welcomed Galadriel as a guest is a debatable interpretation of last episode's events, but Galadriel clearly hasn't stolen any scrolls. She brought them from what is, at most, a private library to which Elendil at least has official access, to present those scrolls to the Queen with Elendil's permission. So Miriel either has no idea what the word stealing means, or she's trying to dodge the conversation, both of which are dumb. Muriel mockingly suggests that Elendil is a runic emperor at the suggestion that Halbrand is the king of the Southlands, which is problematic. First off, the word emperor is completely absent from Tolkien's writings outside of a reference to the butterflies in The Hobbit. That might not seem like it's significant, but it is. The concept of emperor is a Roman one, which only existed in the Middle Ages outside of maybe Spain, I suppose, in the form of the Holy Roman Empire. An emperor, in the medieval conception, wasn't simply a king with a lot of territory like it's often construed today. The title of emperor implied a sort of universal leadership over Christendom, both within his personal kingdom and without. Even the Dunedain kings of Arondir and Gondor weren't considered emperors, no matter how vast their lands became. At most you have the title of High King, with the likes of Gil-galad or the kings of Gondor. But more importantly, Elendil is a member of a noble house of Numenor. Muriel should be ashamed to place him, or any member of any noble house, on anything less than a level with a runic emperor. Hell, Gandalf even considered Denethor, as a mere steward, to be a far greater dignity than Theoden because Denethor was descended from the Numenorians. Galadriel asks Muriel to back Halbrand against Sauron to prevent him from taking control of the Southlands. Muriel declines, so Galadriel throws a temper tantrum. I will admit I'm starting to get bored of this.
There's a tempest in me.
I'm not even going to deal with that. Okay, so she demands to see the real king, that is Tar Palantir, and Muriel gets mad and throws her in a dungeon.
Don't tell me. Tavern brawl.
You weren't even in a tavern brawl. Why are you saying this? Alright, so then we have this scene. Okay, so you know how I've had a designated Scene of Utter Absurdity section for each episode? In episode 1, it was Galadriel's trip to Valinor with the flashback to Finrod and her attempt to swim the ocean. Look, I'm sorry I keep bringing it up, but it's just so absurd. It's a concept so bad that all I need to do is mention it to friends and family as why they shouldn't watch the show, and they immediately understand. In episode 2, it was the entire zombie, broken mouth orc sequence with Bronwyn and Theo, and in episode 3 we had Greg and pals attempt to escape the orc trench. The problem that I came across while writing the script was that this episode has 3 of them, and I couldn't pick which one to go with, so instead we're going to treat them all as such. So the Sailmaster starts with talking about how these cadets are nearly there, that they've almost passed their trials, and that in a few days he'll have the pleasure of calling these men shipmates. We then pan over to Isil, who's daydreaming again. Hearing the call of his name from, I guess, his mother in what I think is Western Numenor or something like that, he realizes even more strongly than he did before that he doesn't want to be a part of this whole sea life thing, and so he concocts a plan to get kicked off. Let's see that plan in action. What? So Isildur's plan to get kicked off the Sea Guard is to let go of a rope, something that someone else did last episode and we didn't see him get kicked off for it, so I'm not sure why he's even having this plan in the first place. So he takes responsibility, to which the Sailmaster says he's seen him do it properly 100 times and concludes that it was deliberate. Okay, so first off, that's stupid. The fact that someone can do something properly 100 times doesn't mean they'll never mess up, even if it's as simple as easing a halyard. This guy either doesn't know that Isildur daydreams, in which case he has definitely not been paying close enough attention to these cadets to judge their readiness for being made official shipmates, or he's aware of the daydreams and hasn't considered kicking Isildur off the ship necessary before. In either case, he should absolutely not have enough information from this to know that Isildur's mistake was deliberate. In any case, Isildur's ludicrous plan actually works and he gets kicked off the Sea Guard. But then, the Sailmaster decides to kick off these 2 guys as well, even though they had absolutely nothing to do with this. Why? Why would you go on about how excited you are to call these schmucks your shipmates, and then randomly fire 3 of them? Or at least 2 of them in addition to the guy who actually did something wrong? Is this all it really takes to get you kicked off? One mistake and you're out? Clearly not, because again, this guy doesn't seem to have gotten kicked off last episode. What is going on? Ooh, but we're not done here, no siree, because then his friends are for some reason angry at Isildur, as if their getting fired was somehow his fault. Hey, funny story. So the other day I was working at my warehousing job, and one of my coworkers caused an entire case of building materials to collapse onto the floor, you know, from the top of one of those tall aisles. And so naturally, I and the cashier, who wasn't doing anything, go over to help clean it up, and my boss comes over and tells the guy that he knows it was deliberate. So he fires him, and then he fires me and the cashier as well. Naturally, the two of us, being the reasonable people that we are, start blaming the idiot who dropped the case rather than our boss for being stupid. I can't believe that this is an actual thing that happened in the show. So this guy starts reprimanding Isildur for getting them fired, even though the fact that the Seamaster is an idiot wasn't Isildur's fault, and they should be angry at him instead. He says, leave it to you to get kicked out of something you never earned in the first place, which is supposed to be an insult, I guess? Wouldn't you be more likely to get kicked out of something you never earned? He brings up Anarion, this being the second time he's mentioned in the show, and then insults Isildur with his dead mother and... Why? Why are we doing this? I understand that this is meant to be character development for Isildur, but apart from this whole sequence being absurd, and the fact that Isildur's character was never really set up in the first place, so what are we even supposed to be getting out of this? This scene is one of the worst examples of characters simply saying things to try and get an emotional response out of the audience, without the writers actually setting up the scene to make that emotional response justified. And furthermore... Actually, you know what? Let's just move on. This video is going to be long enough already. And then we've got a continuation of the ending of last episode, where Adar gradually comes into frame and we see it's some elf with a scar, I guess. I honestly don't know why they made it so that he was blurry last episode. Did they really think a face reveal would be a spoiler? Anyway, I'm going to assume, for the purposes of this review at least, that this is meant to be Sauron. The who is Sauron thing seems to be more of a fan reaction rather than something the show itself has been emphasizing. It's true that Galadriel is trying to find out where Sauron is, but I think that's meant to have been answered in the last episode with the revelation of the meaning of this mark. Furthermore, I've seen no evidence whatsoever that this show has the capability of even the slightest amount of subtlety. Therefore, I have difficulty believing that the elves in the last episode are wrong, that the orcs are serving someone else, and they would make this reveal so drawn out and suspenseful just to have it not be Sauron. Nevertheless, I did want to acknowledge that it could very well not be Sauron, that this is simply misdirection. In any case, Sauron seems to be mercy-killing this orc who was injured in the fight, viewing the loss of the creature with sorrow. I'm sorry, what? If this is Sauron, then he should be making this thing's pain long and drawn out for the amusement of those around. These are orcs we're talking about. They laugh at the pain of their friends and allies. They hate each other and quarrel constantly, and that's how Sauron likes them. So Arondir, as a Sylvan elf, should not be able to understand Quenya. The Sylvan elf dialect is so far removed even from Sindarin, which is much closer, that even Frodo has difficulty making out what they're saying when he's in Lothlorien. Sindarin is the version of Elvish which functions as the sort of lingua franca among the elves of Middle-earth, since the elves of Doriath were by far the most powerful group when the Noldor came to Beleriand. But since Quenya was far more difficult to learn for them than Sindarin was for the Noldor had decided to adopt Sindarin as their inter-Elvish language. Ultimately, this is just a sort of roundabout way of saying these two should be speaking in Sindarin. Which reminds me, I haven't had subtitles on the entire time, and I'll admit I'm not enough of a Tolkien geek to immediately distinguish them, but it seems like Sindarin has been mostly absent from the show. If this is true, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is certainly a mistake. Most characters are using the Sindarin forms of their names, and the songs and texts of Elvish and Middle-earth are usually Sindarin throughout Lord of the Rings. Wait a second. It's pronounced Sindarin. I've been saying Sindarin this entire time. Sorry to anyone who noticed that. If I recall correctly, the only example of Quenya in Lord of the Rings is Namarie, which is sung by Galadriel as the Fellowship leaves Lorien. I guess this is a really roundabout way of saying they can't even get the Elvish correct. I'm so glad they kept these wargs in even as a jump scare. Certainly got me, even the second time, though I don't think I'll ever get used to this face, so... yeah. Adar tells Arondir the trailer line that he's been told so many lies that to untangle them all would require the creation of a new world. He then says,
"But that is something only the gods can do, and I am no god. At least... not yet."
Okay, So if this isn't Sauron, then I'll admit that I don't even know what this is supposed to mean. But if this is Sauron, then I'm guessing this is supposed to refer to his plan to create the One Ring. If so, why on earth would Sauron be saying this? Sauron should either believe himself to be a god, being a Maya, or he should be trying to restore Morgoth, which was at least theoretically what his goal was in the Second Age. I actually have no idea how Sauron, or anyone for that matter, planning on becoming a god makes any sort of sense in the context of Tolkien's Legendarium. We see certain characters attempting to achieve god-level powers through the use of art, which is what Sauron and to a certain extent the elves are trying to do. But that isn't really what's being emphasized here, or at least it doesn't seem like it. Before this, Arondir asks Adar why the orcs call him father. Adar ignores it. After this, he asks, "Who are you?" Adar ignores this as well. Then he tells Arondir to go back to the watchtower and deliver a message, and we'll get back to this. In our next scene, we have Bronwyn and the others taking way too many people into this watchtower, and this is simply being impractical. They really should be sending these people on their way to the next watchtower or fortified holding, not taking everyone in. We then learn that there's a shortage of food. Yeah, you guys are failing to discriminate. And none of these people are bringing food with them? Also, who's in charge?
We'll have to cut rations again.
You're not cutting my rations. Who gave you the right to decide?
Everyone who decided to come to this tower, Waldrick, including you.
Wait, Bronwyn's in charge? Why? None of these people have mayors or councils or lords or anything? How is that even possible? I heard someone suggest that maybe it's because the elves were acting as a sort of de facto government, but no. No, that's not how this works. Occupying forces still have to deal with local governments and communicate and work with them, unless you're just straight up annexing the territory, which the elves clearly were not doing. How have these people not elected a leader? Bronwyn says that they basically all picked her when they agreed to follow her to the tower, but no, that's not how this works. What is going on? So Theo says they should go back and get food, and honestly, he's right. There's just as much, if not more, risk hunting in the forest or traveling all the way from Aradruin as there is in getting grain and vegetables from the surrounding villages. At this point, I don't care if Bronwyn was put in charge officially even. She needs to be removed so that they can get some other village idiot to direct everybody. In either case, Bronwyn says no, and so now I'm officially rooting for her to die. So Theo goes alone with this guy who made all those infuriatingly stupid comments to Arondir in episode 1, and whom I realize I never gave a name. Looking at him now, I'd say it's pretty clear that he's a Kyle. And, you know, I've had a pretty good track record when it comes to these characters, so maybe an orc will gut him as well. That's both uncomfortable and impractical. I think this is actually worse than a backscabbard. So Kyle doesn't want to do this, but then Theo tells him not to be such a soft belly, and suddenly he's willing to do it again. Can we just have two characters in the show who aren't children? Okay, well, maybe that's not fair in this scenario, seeing as these are literally children. Though, now that I think about it, it's kind of weird that everyone seems to be acting at their maturity level. So in the next shot, we see them having recovered what seems to be several sacks of grain and a wheelbarrow full of vegetables. I'm sorry, but that's not going to last a week on quarter rations. I can't believe that Theo was the only one who had the brilliant idea of going to get more food, but was so stupid that he didn't realize that 2 people wouldn't be enough to bring much. In either case, Theo wants to get into the tavern since there might be more food there, but Kyle is too scared to go in, so Theo goes alone. He finds some food, which I'm going to call barley because that's my favorite type of grain, and he begins shoveling the barley back into the bag with his hands. Dude, just pick up the sack and go. Okay, that's pretty funny, though I'm not entirely sure that's what they were going for. So we've got an orc who slowly closes the door and scuttles across the room. Then he waits for Theo to turn around and see him so that he can do a big scary roar and slash him. Then Theo takes the sword out of his back and the orc says,
Where'd you get that?
Alright. I'll give this section credit. Some of this stuff is hilarious. So this orc goes out and says, "I found it," indicating that the sword hilt is clearly something they've been looking for. Theo hides in the well and makes a noise, which this orc hears, so he goes under the water to hide for a moment. In our next scene, we go back to Elrond, and we see that the dwarves have accepted the offer, and the forge is being built. Elrond contemplates how wonderful it is that the elves and dwarves are getting along, and all the glorious things they can accomplish if we just work together. Celebrimbor then mentions how much Elrond is like his father Arondir. Elrond replies that he wasn't aware the two had ever met. To be fair, neither was I. Celebrimbor remembers that once Arondir told him that his life would be in his son's hands one day, and seems unsettled.
You seem unsettled today, my lord.
I just said that. Celebrimbor says...
No, I promised myself I wouldn't mention it. He's your friend.
Which is the worst way to pretend not to want to talk to someone about something, which I'd imagine Mr. Politician here would have been able to figure out. Then Celebrimbor says that Durin is either avoiding him or hiding something, so naturally Elrond goes and tries to find Durin. We see him talking to Disa about how suspicious it is that no one seems to tell him where he is.
Are you suggesting Durin's got himself a wee girlfriend?
There is none other than you, milady.
I know. Who'd have him?
So, I'm gonna be honest, I actually kind of like Disa. I'm not saying she's a good character, but the actress is clearly having a lot of fun with this role, and her dialogue and delivery have something along the lines of life to them, rather than the sterile, vapid talk everyone else is doing. Make of that what you will. Elrond notices that Durin didn't take certain mining tools with him, just before Disa comes up with the notion that Durin is mining in Quartz Chasm. Elrond, however, immediately knows that this is a lie, as Disa is cooking food for him, and he doesn't have his chiseling hammer. We then hear the children continues to recite something that we heard a few moments ago, and Disa gets offended that he thinks she's lying, coming up with an explanation for her obvious lie. In the next shot, we see confirmation that she was lying, as Durin and Disa continue their bizarrely sensual small talk we saw in episode 2. Elrond reads their lips as we have what I think is a dolly shot indicating his superhuman vision, confirming that, yes, elves do have amazing eyes even in this dimension, making the fact that they didn't spot this all the more unacceptable. In any case, Elrond sees Durin talk about the old mine under Mirrormere. Why do you have a mine under a lake? Well, anyway, he goes there. He tries to get into the actual mine after seeing some footprints walk into the wall, but finds that the wall won't budge. He then tries knocking the tune that he heard Durin's children singing to each other, and it works. You know, I could talk about this, but we're not even halfway through this episode yet, so let's just keep going. Elrond walks in and finds some glowing ore, and Durin yells at him angrily and says that this was the true reason he sent Elrond. Presumably, he means Gil-galad, given Durin's conversation with his father later this episode. Elrond is understandably confused, and Durin says, "You want it for yourselves." Okay, so we know that this is mithril now, so let's just get this whole discussion out of the way. Why is mithril apparently something that can be only mined under Mirrormere? Moria is supposed to be known for its mithril nodes, and more importantly, why are the dwarves being protective of it rather than just trading with it like they are in the books? They also act as if mithril is like this super mysterious, brand new, never before seen metal. So it would be a bit awkward if mithril had been fitted, I don't know, on a certain flying ship in the First Age. And it would be even more awkward if that certain flying ship had been mentioned and commemorated by a certain hobbit in a certain story, wouldn't it? And it would be even more awkward if there were a Numenorian heirloom which used mithril since the first couple of kings of Numenor, wouldn't it? Anyway, Durin asks for Elrond's oath that he won't talk about it with anyone. Not sure why we're still pretending promises have value, given what happened last time these two were in an episode together. Elrond swears this oath, and then Durin shows him the mithril ore. Elrond asks why he doesn't celebrate it, and Durin says it's because it's perilous to mine, and his father has restricted every effort. As if that's a reason not to celebrate it. We have a few closing words of diplomatic friendship from Elrond, and then Durin gifts him an ore. Then the cave collapses and Durin rushes in. In the next scene we see the sister, which is what I'm going to call her from now on, sketching the door into whatever building this is. Apparently what she's supposed to be doing is menial cleaning work, which... Wait. Why is she doing that as a builder? She gives some kind of excuse about how scrubbing is good for dexterity, which I don't even think is true. In any case, Kevin tries to flirt with her and it seems to work, and then we go back to Galadriel, who's pacing in her prison cell. Halbrand gives Galadriel advice, and I know they showed this earlier, but why are they next to each other? I know the actual reason is so that this conversation can happen, but why on earth would the Numenorians put a brawler and an elf who apparently has seditious tendencies together, especially when they both came on the same ship? In any case, Halbrand tells Galadriel that what she should do is identify what her opponent fears most, and I kid you not, Galadriel cuts in with saying, "and exploit it." I know this is what her established character is at this point, but the more I see this creature on screen, the more it baffles me that any human being thought this was a good idea.
Give them a means of mastering it, so that you
can master them.
Okay, so I'm gonna be honest. I've never found the Halbrand is Sauron theories to be very compelling, but this comment, more than anything else, is perhaps the single best argument one can make for the theory. If this really is Halbrand's thought process, then that is exactly how Sauron thinks. Which leads me to the actual truth of Sauron's identity. Sauron is Luke Skywalker. He's got the prosthetic arm, and he's achieved such a knowledge of the Force that he's able to morph himself into a different form and astral project himself to Numenor like in The Last Jedi. It totally works. Think about it. Actually, don't think about it too much. Halbrand finally gets Galadriel to realize that Miriel is scared of people talking to her father above all else. A few seconds later, soldiers come in and Pharazôn announces that she's going to be allowed back home on a guarded ship. Galadriel then shoves these guys into a cage, and Pharazôn draws a dagger and does nothing while Halbrand advises him not to do that. You know what? Let's just move on. I don't want to deal with this right now. The sister meets up with Isildur and tells her about how he got everyone dismissed. Don't remind me. And he expresses such shame that he doesn't feel worthy to go into the West where he's always wanted to be. They then hear about how Galadriel has escaped, and we see her go into the tower with Tar Palantir. Miriel, however, is already there, and Galadriel sees that Tar Palantir is deathly old and sick. Galadriel then demands to know why Miriel is not faithful to the elves, and for some reason Miriel complies, even though she has no reason to do anything for Galadriel at this point. She explains how she rose to become Queen Regent while they walk over to a Palantir. Then we get this line.
Palantir. 7 seeing stones there once were. The other 6 either lost or hidden.
I'm sorry. What? No. Absolutely not. No. That... Okay, well, it looks like they're deciding to contradict the information not only in the Silmarillion and Unfinished Tales, but even the explicit information we were given in Lord of the Rings and the appendices. Have these people even read Lord of the Rings? We know of 4 Palantiri still used at the end of the Third Age, if you count the one that Círdan has, and the rest were either lost or destroyed long after the fall of Numenor. Also, I guess in this timeline there's literally only ever been 7 that made it to Numenor? Also, the stones were given to the faithful as a means of continuing to communicate with the elves. Where did this one come from? Miriel says it was passed to her father with a secret. Okay, by whom? How? How did this stone somehow learn to see the future? That's literally not the purpose of Palantir, and Galadriel should know this, especially if she's touched Palantiri before. But no, she pretends as if this is just a normal function, as if this is like the Mirror of Galadriel, where it can see the future and some things might not come to pass. The only way they could possibly reconcile this is by saying that the faithful or Elendil stole the other 6, but that still doesn't make sense, since he has 7 when he comes to Middle-earth. Maybe he steals this one too when they leave? Did they watch the Jackson movies and just think that Saruman's orb was the only one left? But even if that's true, why can't it see the future in the Third Age then? Which one is this? What is going on? Okay, moving on. Miriel says that she's going to get rid of Galadriel so she can avoid the whole Numenor sinking under the ocean thing. Galadriel says that if the evil rising in Middle-earth is left unchecked, it will spread and take us all. Miriel then says, "I will not second-guess the gods." What? Galadriel then says she knows what it's like to be the only one who sees, the only one who knows, and that they should join forces so they don't have to be alone like that any longer. She tells Miriel to choose the path of faith rather than the path of fear, and Miriel responds,
Faith may bind one heart, Galadriel, but it is too fine a thread from which to hang a kingdom.
We then see that the hunters have come back with what looks to be a few birds and the nutritional equivalent of a cabbage. Kyle then comes back with his wheelbarrow and everyone immediately begins ravaging the food. They don't ravage this food for some reason, but oh well. Bronwyn asks Kyle where Theo is and the bastard legit says, "He said he'd be right behind me." Alright, I'm officially rooting for him to die. We then cut to Theo and find that he's still in the well. Not sure why he stayed there until night. He understands that orcs aren't as out and about during the day. I feel like he'd be exhausted at this point. Wait, actually, you know what? Now that I think about it, how have the orcs been searching around all day? We saw that it was cloudy when Kyle left, but that doesn't mean it's going to be cloudy for the rest of the day. We hear an orc say, "We've turned over every stone." Really? And he didn't give the well another go? Why don't one of you jump down there to check to see if he's not hiding in the water? Anyway, Theo climbs out and we commence what can only be described as a video game sequence, where Theo dodges and weaves through orc patrols, ducking behind cover and laying in the tall grass, all while being crippled by an injury and presumably not the cleanest water in the world now that the orcs have been drinking from it. I half expected to see an exclamation mark over the orc's head or a "What was that? Must have been the wind" comment. Though, I guess we sort of see that with this. He grabs one of the sacks of grains, which... Okay, buddy, let the grain go. Seriously. And then, eventually we get to this corner where Theo triggers the cutscene at the end of this segment. I legit knew that this is exactly what was going to happen, because this just felt like one of the most cliche ways you could do this. Arondir saves him, which... Hold on, wait, they gave him his weapons back? Why? And why is he all clean? Does he have his armor too? And why is Arondir here? Does this village just so happen to be a straight shot from the orc trenches to the watchtower? Well, that's lucky. We then begin the scene. I've been waiting for this, honestly, since the very first trailer, and we got to see this shot. What's better is the fact that literally everything here is in slow motion. Okay, so first off, Stormtrooper aim is a dumb trope and needs to stop. At least show that they're a long distance away like in Fellowship. That would be much more believable. Second, I'm willing to allow for the notion that an elf could theoretically catch an arrow if he were prepared. But I do want to remind everyone that catching an arrow isn't really the most practical way of gaining ammo, let's say. But look, I don't care how good your dysfunctional elf eyes are. You cannot turn around and catch an arrow that was flying at you with your bare hands. Then Bronwyn arrives, and you know what? I'll just accept that. The sun begins to come up as they make their way out of the forest, and all three of them should be dead, pelted by dozens of arrows at this point. In any case, the orcs can't go out, remember, because they're allergic to the sun? Didn't forget about that, did you? Arondir holds his sword like this, which is... just stupid. Either the orcs are going to come out and attack you guys, in which case get out the bow and catch some more arrows, or keep running. Or they aren't going to come out and catch you guys, in which case get out the bow, catch some more arrows, or keep running. There are exactly 0 situations here where you should be brandishing your sword. Thankfully, Ismail retrieved his acting face for the entire sequence. Throughout the last part of this sequence, we hear a woman singing, and in the next scene we see that it's Disa. Elrond notices that the dirt on the rock is shifting at the sound and asks what that was. Disa says that it was a plea to the rocks that those still alive will be able to come out of the collapsed tunnel. This plea is apparently answered as Durin informs them that everyone's alive. Disa says that his father must be so relieved, and then Durin goes into a tirade about how he's so angry at his father for shutting the mine down now that people have almost died, and how he wishes he could tell his father exactly what he thinks of him so that he never has to talk to him again. Now, I'm not going to try and imply as if this is an unrealistic version of a father-son relationship. As it's completely reasonable that a son would be angry at his father for being overly cautious or overly protective or any other form of inconvenience. And yes, I have been drinking, so you're experiencing the real me now. However, I do have a little bit of a request to anyone who is planning on doing this in the future. Make it so that the emotional outburst is set up before it happens. We see these two in the same room for all of, like, a minute in episode 2, and no aspect of it seemed inimical. Then, the closest we get is that Durin rolls his eyes at the fact that his father limits mithril mining for safety reasons, moments before a chasm collapses and almost kills 4 dwarves. This outburst, as a result, either feels childish or like it comes out of nowhere, neither of which is particularly compelling or tragic in any way, shape, or form. Anyway, Elrond mentions how he wishes he could talk to his father again and tells Durin not to throw away his relationship with his father. Durin then goes and apologizes to Durin. Why did they have to give them the same name? I guess that's normal. Sort of. And the king tells him something about hearing the voices of past kings. So, Were they the ones who told you to make that crown, or did you come up with that idea on your own? I refuse to believe that this is an heirloom. In any case, the king tells Durin that there is nothing to forgive, and yeah, there really shouldn't be. I don't think it was ever established that Durin was doing something wrong, unless it was supposed to be implied that he shouldn't have been mining mithril, which doesn't make sense given the ending of episode 2. So the king is still suspicious of Elrond and Gil-galad, and Durin agrees, so he goes with Elrond to find out what Gil-galad is up to. And then we go back to Arondir and Bronwyn and find out that Adar's message is an offer. Submit to him or they'll come with his army. Okay, look. If you want to make this sort of ultimatum, then come to the tower with your army, or at least send a messenger of your own rather than releasing an enemy elf. It's not like this is a hostage negotiation or something. He literally just sent back Aramir, gave him his weapons, his armor, and cleaned him up. All for what? So that he could tell him that he's gonna invade? Why? What is the point of this? Then we've got this scene with Theo and this dude. You know what? Let's call him John. Maybe I can kill him too. And honestly, I don't care enough to comment on this scene, and I need to stop talking about this episode at this point. So, yeah, we're moving on. At last, we get to the end of episode 4 with Galadriel's departure from Numenor. She gets on the boat as Elendil says, "Go in peace in Quenya." Then Pharazôn says that the people will be relieved and will be waiting for Muriel's speech in the plaza. They go, and then it starts raining petals from that tree they were talking about last episode. This, apparently, changes Muriel's mind, and so she makes a speech to the people in her court, where she repeats what she said with disdain to Elendil last episode, and she asks whether the present-day Numenorians are still like the heroes who created Numenor, or if their strength has faded and it's confined to the statues they've made. Which, actually, you know what? That reminds me. Numenor should be littered with glorious tombs. And no, I'm not joking. Every part of this island should be covered with tombs. If you're going to have the Black Numenorians, at the very least, show us why they turned bad in the first place. Or at least show us the results of why they turned bad in the first place. Alright, so she says that she won't be asking anything of anyone she wouldn't do herself. So she's personally going to escort Galadriel back to Middle-earth to aid their brethren in the Southlands. During this, we see that Galadriel's actually back in Numenor, that Halbrand has been freed. Why? Pharazôn and Elendil, as well as presumably other messengers throughout Numenor, ask for volunteers for the expeditionary force to Middle-earth, which will leave in 10 days. I guess Numenor doesn't have anything like a standing army? Actually, you know what? I'm okay with that. That's actually a good thing. At first, everyone is hesitant, then Isildur's friends raise their hands, and so does Isildur, which makes his sister put on her worried face, and suddenly everyone starts volunteering. Okay, so I just have a few questions. Muriel's concern, as articulated in this episode, is that any attempt to help the elves will bring about Numenor's downfall, inspired by the example of the apparent civil war that took place when her father attempted to restore elvish ways, or something. Why, then, would the falling of the petals suddenly convince her to do a 180 when she had already rejected the plea from Galadriel? The significance of the petals both to Muriel and the rest of the Numenorians was not set up well enough for this to make sense, for this to be a reasonable character motivation. Sure, we had the material for a setup in connecting the petals to the Valar, but it was in the context of a line that implied that this was something no one actually believed. Even Elendil laughed it off. Granted, that might be because of the fact that he was just trying to impress Muriel, but there's not enough setup. That's just the long and the short of it. Initially, I was extremely confused as to why in one scene we see Galadriel sailing away, and in the next one we see her in the palace again, but I guess they were just going for surprise there? I don't know. I guess it's fine. The main part that I find concerning is just how fickle the Numenorians apparently are. These are likely the same people who are willing to stone the queen at the implication that she was going to let elves steal their jobs, and now they're willing to go and fight for her on the call of an elf to help the Southlands? Not to mention the fact that these are probably going to be the same group of people who march with Pharazôn, or heaven forbid his son, to Valinor and then get buried under a mountain. Muriel's 180 was already bizarre, but this is just inexcusable. Don't show a restless population being angry at their monarch for something, and then show them being supportive of them for doing that thing later that day. Oh boy. We're finally done. That was a long one. Alright, so I got about halfway through writing the script for this episode, and I decided that these closing remarks were going to have to be very short, so let's go through them. I will admit, at the very least, they address the fact that Muriel should be one of the faithful. The justification doesn't really make that much sense, but an attempt was made, and at this point I'm just glad to find one thing where they aren't outright contradicting everything Tolkien wrote about his characters. Now, the character everyone seems to like throughout this show is Elrond, and while I think I understand why, Robert Aramayo is a really good actor, and he's actually doing a fantastic job with the role he's been given. However, I'd like to express why I don't like him. An obvious part of this is that he's simply not the Elrond that Tolkien wrote, and as I expressed in my first review, I simply find him to be less interesting as a politician than the lore master and herald of Gil-galad that we see in the Silmarillion. Which I know probably sounds odd given just how little he does in the Second Age in Tolkien's writings, but there was something of a timelessness about his character even in the First and Second Age, and to be honest, Elrond in the show just seems scummy to me. He's wearing this fake facade and using diplomatic language to forward his purposes, lying to his friends by insisting that his reason for coming to Khazad-dûm was that he wished to see him, and then reprimanding Disa for lying to him. Thus, I end up having a similar attitude towards Elrond as I do with everyone else in the show. These simply aren't good characters in the first place, and it's really painful to see Tolkien's amazing characters share names with them. Still, I suppose I have made my bed, and so I must lie in it. We're now officially halfway through, and I'll certainly give this episode one thing: it was not boring to watch. I had to pause this episode almost every single minute because of just how awful everything was. And yet, honestly, I find this kind of bad to be so much more entertaining and enjoyable to watch and review than the boring sludge of the last 2 episodes. So, as far as I'm concerned, keep up the good work, fellas.